Hey everyone, I'm Kieran O'Donnell if you haven't met me before, and I'm one of the Locus team, and I'm here today with another one of our team members to give you a short webinar on FME Server Apps, and particularly getting hands-on with them this time. If you've seen any of my presentations before in the last year or so, you probably will have realized that I'm a big fan of FME Server Apps, so I really jumped at the chance to give a more in-depth webinar and a hands-on topic, hands-on discussion about this topic. Just a little bit about us, if you're new to Locus as well, is we are Locus and we've been operating in Australia and New Zealand for quite a while now, over 10 years on the FME journey, solving data challenges. We've worked with over 350 organizations across New Zealand, Australia, and elsewhere in the world as well. And we are a platinum value-added reseller of FME. We've got more than 9 experts with FME technical certifications, and that includes the whole range of certifications awarded by Safe Software, being certified professionals, service certified, and certified trainers as well. And as you'll see there at the top, there's me on the left, but we'll also have Gary Nicholson joining me very shortly. He's another one of our FME gurus who work here with Locus, and he's a lot more knowledgeable than me, so I'm sure he'll have some interesting insights into FME Server Apps for you as well. Just a quick intro on the agenda. Today we're going to start with an introduction to Server Apps and what are they in particular. Then I'll hand over to Gary to give you a few considerations, discussions around server apps, things to think about, and particularly in the use of user parameters and the different options you might have. Then I'm going to take you into a working example using a really widely used service here in New Zealand, which is called the Lynn's data service. So pretty much anyone in New Zealand, probably parts of Australia, are actually familiar with the Lynn's data service. It's an open data portal where you can download a lot of land information in New Zealand. So I really want to take you through quite an in-depth example of that, about building a really good FME Workspace server app, which allows a lot of user interaction, and I think is a really good case study of using server apps well. Then I'll take you through creating FME server gallery apps. That'll be quite a short topic, but it is a new one and a useful tool, which has been released in the 2020 version of FME Server. A little bit on sharing, and then I'll sum up, hopefully, before I lose everyone's attention as well. So a little bit about FME server apps. Maybe if you're new to FME or you haven't really had a deep dive into FME Server at this stage, you might be wondering what FME Server Apps are. Server Apps were new in the 2019 version of FME Server, and Gallery Apps in particular are actually only new in the 2020 version of FME Server. So if you haven't been spending a lot of time in the most recent versions, you might not have come across them, but don't worry, they are fairly straightforward. So Workspace apps, they are an interactive way for users to run an FME workspace without having to log into the FME server web interface. That makes them a lot more accessible because there are a lot of restrictions around who you actually want to log in and access the full functionality of your FME server in a lot of organizations. But having, I guess, an interface where someone can actually reach a web page that doesn't have the full functionality of FME server is a really good way for people to be able to run a workspace app, run a workspace using FME Server. Gallery apps, they're quite small, but they really are just a customizable landing page for groupings of workspace apps and other relevant links. So it's kind of like really a landing page for people to access other apps that you've created. It's ultimately, in short, it's a customizable web page which has the ability to interact with FME Server. And also, much like in any other FME fashion, you get to customize something which you would otherwise have to write code for. So that's a big win if you don't want to spend your time writing code as well. Why use FME Server Apps? That might be a question that you've asked if you've been looking at them and I'm trying to understand what the whole point of an FME Server app is, particularly if you're an FME Server administrator or a publisher. You have the full functionality, full suite of FME Server available to you, as well as FME Desktop. So you'd be thinking, you might think, why would I use an FME Server app? What's really good about them is that they're an interactive solution where the customer performs the task rather than a technician or analyst. Given that we're here in, I guess, an FME specific forum, you probably are more likely the technician, the analyst, or the administrator. But really, this is a good model where the customer actually performs it. So you publish a workspace and people can run that on demand whenever they please, as many times as they like. Customers have that power to perform a task when they're needed, when they need the result, and then they can customize the variables they need modified through effective use of user parameters, which Gary will talk a lot more about, and then I'll show you in the working example as well. There's a feedback loop where the customer can see what worked and what they didn't, and that gives them the power to rectify any issues that they have immediately. That's one of the biggest frustrations I had when I started working in, I guess, data related or JS related tasks, is that so much of it relates to data that you have no option or no power to rectify if something goes wrong. So the customer is really the person who needs to solve that at the source, and you're really just the medium of actually getting a task to be run. So having that ability for that feedback loop to happen instantly is great, because then the customer can then again run it on demand, just run it again rather than have to go through the whole process again. So it's really just all about, in that sense, better service delivery as well. And I think the real value here as well is that there's a connection between the customer and the process. Again, one of those frustrations is that there's no understanding of how these things work, because often a technician or an analyst or a developer just gives a customer a result. So they don't really get the option to remedy any issues that you had to solve along the way. And I think that sort of has caused a lot of issue of sort of low data maturity in a lot of organizations as well. So actually having the customer closer to the process really just helps give them a broader understanding of how that technology works. Hopefully it will improve the maturity over a longer period of time as well, which, yeah, would be really nice if, there's just a better understanding. People actually think consciously about what they're putting in and what they're feeding into reports, because ultimately that's what they're going to get as a product at the end as well. And just one short question is when to make your workspace into an app. And the key thing here is interaction. So if your workspace just needs to run, deliver a result, and it has no interaction from a user, then you can just leave it as a workspace and utilize the functionality within FME Server, where you might want to use just a scheduled task that uses a date timestamp as the variable, but that just runs perpetually and doesn't require any sort of input or changes from the user. But if your workspace has a variable that could be modified, that's a really good time to think about making your workspace into a workspace app. Because instead of having variables that you just click and change, and modify inside a workspace, you can actually just serve that up as an app and let the customer play around, change as many of the variables as they want, whenever they want, upload a different file as an input, choose an area of interest, enter different addresses or regions, and run that model whenever they please. So that's a really good time to make a workspace into an app, which hopefully I can explain and show you a little bit better when I go through this example as well. But on that note, I'd just like to hand over to Gary Nicholson. He's going to take you through some considerations for FME Server and talk about user parameters in particular. Just one moment while I hand over to him.
Okay, thank you, Kieran. Okay, so when you decide to develop a FME Server app, one of the most important things you need to think about is what sort of information you're going to be asking the user for. So in FME desktop or FME server, when you need to request information from whoever's running it, you get that through published parameters. So there's a whole range of different types of published parameters. The most simple one is a text one. Might be asking for somebody's name. We have a text published parameter. If you want them to write a report, it might be a multi-line text published parameter. Or you could give them a drop-down list with a choice. So it'd be a choice with alias or just a choice published parameter. You can ask for a number. There's a whole range of published parameters. I won't go into all of these in detail because they work in server apps exactly the same as they do in desktop and FME server. I'm going to cover a few special ones that you might want to use in FME server apps. I'll try and do it without stealing too much of Kieran's thunder. He's going to show you how to create a server app and a gallery app, so I'll try not to step on his toes. But the first thing to be aware of is that FME server apps can be run in two ways at the moment. One is through a browser, and one is through an application called FME Data Express. And for the parameters I'm going to show you, they behave slightly differently. So one of the most important things when having a mobile app in particular, you might be interested in where the user is. Dimitri Brag from Safe did quite an amazing demo put up on YouTube yesterday. He's got a server app that can access the GPS location on the user's phone. And it goes off and gets the air quality data for the user's location, and then shows that in a FME AR augmented reality app that shows on the phone, so you can spin it around and see where the air quality is worse in his location. And Dimitri's going to be doing a webinar on the FME AR app in the next month or so. I'm really looking forward to that, and that app works well with FME server apps. So to get location from a user on the phone, if you're using FME Data Express, which is the app that can run on either Android or iPhones, the trick to access the GPS location is to have a user parameter that starts off being called FME Express underscore location underscore. If you only want one user parameter, then that can be just called that. But I guess in some apps, you may want to have multiple parameters, so you'll have _1, _2, etc. The important thing is that the prefix of the published parameters is FME Express underscore location underscore. If you have that, then FME Data Express knows that it can use the phone's GPS to get to the location. Now, if you're not using FME Data Express, which does require the user to install a separate application, which is not always a desirable thing. If you just want to point them to a web page, you use the browser-based version. And to get a location from the user, in that case, all you need to do is have a parameter of type geometry. If you do that, then a geometry picker map will automatically show up, and your user can use the map to pinpoint their location, or even draw rectangles or polygons or lines or other areas of interest and submit that back up to the FME server. I'll show both of those working shortly. The other special parameter that we have available is barcodes and QR codes, particularly in FME Data Express. You might want to develop an app where you can go around and scan barcodes or QR codes. And I'll show you an example of where I'm going to find that useful shortly. With FME Data Express, there's nothing special about that. All you do is create a text user parameter, and you'll automatically have the option to populate that text parameter with a barcode or a QR code. And the final special parameter is if you want the user to be able to take a photo and submit that for upload, all you need to do is add a JPEG reader to your workspace, and FME Data Express will automatically pop up this pop-up list here and allow you to take a photo from the camera. So these parameters are all going to come in useful for an app I'm going to develop for next year. I've talked about Oxfam Trailwalker before in a number of talks that I've done. I've been doing the timing system for Trailwalker for over 10 years now. And you'll see all the walkers here. They've got a bib with a barcode. And previously, the timing system I developed uses a laptop at the finish line or at all of the checkpoints with a barcode scanner. The walkers walk up to the laptop, get their barcode scanned, and that records the time that they've arrived at the checkpoints or the finish lines. I was going to upgrade that this year, but Trailwalker didn't happen this year for obvious reasons. Next year in Taranaki, I'm going to replace the laptops with just mobile phones and FME Server Apps. So you won't have to walk up to a laptop. Someone at the start or finish line or the checkpoints can just walk up to you, scan the barcode in, record whatever information they need to on their phone, and it should be a lot simpler. So what I'm going to do here, I'll show you the workspace that I'm going to use. The main published parameters I'm interested in is what checkpoints they're at. So this is a choice with alias user parameter. So the operator will see start, CP1, CP2, etc. And it will submit a code back to the workspace. The team number we're going to get from a barcode. So this is simply a text user parameter. If I use that in FME Data Express, I'll have the option to scan the barcode. They need to submit their location because one of the options under checkpoint is on course. So now if every volunteer for Oxfam Trailwalker has this app on their phone, they could be out on the course in the middle of nowhere. They come across an injured walker, they'll be able to submit exactly where they are, make it a lot easier to rescue people, even submit. They need to do that. So we'll have an FME Express underscore location underscore publish parameter. They'll get access to the phone's GPS. And a multi-line text publish parameter allows them to enter notes about the particular team. So once this workspace has been created, there's a server app. I'll skip the how you create that. Kieran will show you that, and I'll come onto my phone. This is FME Data Express. It's useful if you want to control your FME server as well from here. But for now, I've got that workspace created as a server app, and I can come in here and run that. So the first published parameter was the checkpoint I'm at. I'll say I'm on the course. In location. Some reason going through Samsung decks. Takes a while for this one to load up. It's going to make a line of me. While that's playing silly buggers, I'll try. Come on. Okay. So with the text published parameter, I've got the option of scanning a barcode. Click on there. Barcode scanner comes up. And the barcode I just scanned in was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when the operator comes up to a team, I'll just be able to scan that bib barcode, and that will automatically populate. For some reason, this location is not working for me, but they just have to trust me that that populates the location with the GPS on the phone. It could be because the phone is not getting GPS at the moment. But once that's done, just hit run, and it submits the job up to FME Server. And ready for the next person. The photo app, similar. Yeah, take a photo. Maybe the operator wants to take a photo of a broken ankle or something. I'll just take a photo of me. And submit that up to FME Server. So we could tweet that photo out, add it to a gallery, any number of things. That's how they look in FME Server Apps. Then the browser-based version. This is a gallery app, which Kieran will cover. Similar here, that location's not available anymore because it was using an FME_Express, but the browser-based version of that by using a geometry published parameter, you can now get that map and get a rough location from this. Put a pin on the map somewhere, confirm that. Okay. Oops. I like to do that. And similar with photo, it's a bit trickier, a few more steps than with the Data Express. Upload file, you can choose to take a photo of the camera, and I'll take a photo of my setting. Okay, and okay. Okay, or if you're just using it on browser, this is where you get FME Data Express from, either on Apple Store or Google Play, and Server Apps, which Kieran's going to cover. So with that, I'll pass it back to Kieran. And he'll show you how to develop that. For yours, Kieran.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for that, Gary. I guess what I said held true. Obviously, you will have probably seen from that Gary's a lot more knowledgeable than me as well. There's some really good insights into the different options you have for user parameters, and particularly from that mobile suite, which is probably a bit of a black box for a lot of people at this stage as well. So that's really great to see some of those insights onto that. So thanks heaps, Gary. So now I'd just like to take you through a live demo and a working example of creating your own FME Server app. And we're going to create a Workspace app using the Lynn's data service. So for anyone who has not seen the Lynn's data service before, it's a really great portal that Lynn's hosts, and it's to access land information in New Zealand. So here you can browse around a lot of the layers, and a really great piece of functionality is the ability to actually access these over WFSs, which you can access after you navigate to a single data set and go to the services. You can scroll down and see how you can actually pull data using a WFS straight directly from a URL. I'm just going to turn my camera off while I go through this demo as well. Hopefully give you a bit more real estate to actually see what's going on in this workspace as well. So what I've done here to hopefully work through this, and hopefully everything runs smoothly, but like anyone knows with the live demo, it's not always the case that it does run so smoothly. But I've pre-annotated everything and tried to create a few bookmarks in particular to hopefully just make it a little bit more intuitive to follow, because I will gloss over some of these undoubtedly a bit faster than is necessary. So if you are getting a bit lost, hopefully just try and read some of these annotations, which really help to explain the intent of the process of what we're doing at the time as well. And again, that's just another FME best practice thing around, is we always bang on about it, but annotations make everything a lot easier, particularly this blurb up the top here. So this workspace has been created for this purely just for this webinar, but the intention is to demonstrate effective use of user parameters with FME Server Apps to create an interactive data download portal where you're going to use the Lynn's data service and a geocoder hosted by a local government in New Zealand. So I'll share this beginning workspace and the end workspace afterwards, but I'll just remove the geocoder URL as well as my own API key to the Lynn's data service so that we don't have everyone hammering my API token as well. Okay, so the first thing I guess that you'd think about when you're going to create a data download portal is actually thinking about how someone selects the area of interest that they actually want data for. It's not good enough just to say I want all of the data, because that's obviously going to create a pretty massive issue. And if everyone wanted all the data, we just make the data sets available. So a good option would be to create some sort of clip or an ability to generate an area of interest. So that's what I've created there in our first purple bookmark. And as Gary showed, I'm going to show this one as well, is the it's actually the geometry parameter. So one option might be to actually draw a bounding box using that map picker functionality on FME Server. So to do that, I would create a user parameter, and the type I would choose would be geometry. So here I might just say, call it location. Oh, I've already got that, so I'm just going to call this location 2. I might say enter your area of interest. And here under configuration, I can choose the geometry types for input. So we've got polygon, box, line, point. So those are how you're defining how someone can actually draw on a map, whether they can draw a box, a polygon, just enter a point. I might just take off line because it's not particularly useful for a data download. And then you could set your initial bounds for where the map will draw to begin with. and even set a default value. So here, now that I've created a location parameter or a geometry parameter, I can actually just use a geometry replacer and then replace a location parameter. Sorry, use our location parameter we've just created to feed that in, and that will actually create a box. Oh, sorry. In this instance, I'm just going to delete the one I've created and drag across a much nicer one I've pre-prepared. And in this case, say location. Now when I run to my geometry replacer, what I should see here is it actually creates a bounding box based on the GeoJSON value that's in there. Ooh, that's obviously not looking very nice because I haven't set a coordinate system, but that is the way in which it actually generates the shape which we're interested in. Now, one thing I've thought about here, in particular with the Lynn's data service, is the Lynn's data service is great because it has so much data on it. But when we're actually creating sorry, just one moment. I've just received a message that some people might be having issues seeing my screen. So just bear with me for a moment. I'm just going to stop showing my screen and then reshare. I've also heard if that doesn't resolve the issue, that refreshing your browser might help as well, but just bear with me for just a moment. So hopefully if that is working, you should be back at the very, very intro slide, which is the holding page before we actually start the webinar. I'm just going to share my screen again. And hopefully, for anyone who's having those issues, that might have resolved it. But if you aren't getting any luck, we are going to be sharing these slides after the fact. So I know that Angie will be sending out a link to everyone who registered for the webinar as well. So if you registered and you're having a lot of issues seeing my screen, maybe you can hear my voice or one thing or the other, then don't worry, we will be sharing all of this content afterwards, as well as these two workspaces which I'm using as part of this demonstration too. So apologies if you are having any technical difficulties, but if not, then I will press on. Okay. Sorry, I think I just lost my train of thought a little bit. So I was talking about the Lynn's data service and how great it is that they have so much data available. But when you're creating something like an FME Server app, you're giving people a lot of power. You're giving them all the power to essentially, all the power that you give them with the flexibility that you give them with the variables. So here with the geometry replacer, if you give someone the option to say draw a box using FME Server, and I'll just flick over to an old server app I built for our FME World Tour, this is great. I set this one up to allow you to draw a polygon or a box inside town on the west coast, city on the west coast of New Zealand, New Plymouth, where I grew up. And that's great if, people know how to use the portal well. They'll draw a box and they will get data. But the danger that you have here, and anyone who's worked with technology, or I think probably just worked in general, will know that there is nothing to stop a user drawing a box like this. And that creates a real problem because you're giving them the ability to download a number of data sets using the Lynn's data service. They're going to draw that as their area of interest, and then they're going to make a request against the Lynn's data service to essentially download all of the data of all of New Zealand. If you're using an FME server with, you know, 1 or 2 licenses, or sorry, 1 or 2 engines available, or presumably the Lynn's will, you know, kind of time you out before it returns all of that data, but it's going to sit there and hang and occupy your license for a long period of time. So it's one of those cases where you want to, particularly with anything you build in a server app, is you want to limit the ability for a user to really cause those issues. So actually setting up that parameter with someone with the ability to draw a box with no limitation on the size is really dangerous. So another option we could do here instead is to allow the user to just enter an address. So here I want to use an address input by the user on FME server. So I'm going to use a geocoder instead. I'm just going to move this back down to a private parameter. And I'm going to pull in this address parameter, which I've set up. And let's look at the definition. So for an address, there's no real limitations on what you can create in an address. You probably want that to be fairly free text. So here I've set type text, call it address. Think very carefully about what you write in the prompt, because that's what the user is going to see. So you don't want it to be so techy and technical for someone who knows how to use this app. You want to explain to them how to use this app. So what's the address of your location of interest? And in this case, I've just populated it with a value. And this is one gotcha I always forget myself, and it takes me about 10 times of publishing to get it right, is the optional ability. If you leave a parameter optional and someone doesn't fill it out, it's not going to work, because you're saying, give us an area, give us a location to create your area of interest. But if you don't get, an address fed into there and returned, then nothing's going to download. And while the portal didn't work and technically it's user error, at the same time, it means that your app needs more, tightening up, because you allowed someone to create user error. So in that case, I'd say, yeah, try and tighten it up so that as little user error as possible is available, really. So if it needs to be filled out, make sure it's filled out. So then on the geocoder, I've just passed in a geocoder URL, which I'll take out before I pass this on. But the street, not quite sure what I had there. Under street address, I can path in my address. So when someone enters via the FME Server App the address, their text string, that's going to geocode it. When I run this, of complex infrastructure and a lot of services available. Smaller cities, local councils, anything like that, all have the same services available. You don't have to be this giant city, massive corporate with all these resources to actually build some of these processes. So after the geocoder, I have a point, but it's not often that I just want to do a data download on a single point of interest. So I'm going to feed that into a bufferer to create an area of interest instead, much like we did with the geometry map picker. But here with a bufferer, I use a buffer distance, and I'll just drag that parameter up, which I created earlier as well. And you see here on a number parameter, you have the ability to create a range, which is great. Because here again, I've called it buffer distance, but the prompt a user will see is how large would you like the buffer to be? Even buffer might not be a great word, but how large would you like the circle or something to be? Something very non-technical, so that someone who doesn't understand the lingo of this industry will understand it. Then if I go into the configuration, I can say greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. So By doing this, I limit the ability for someone to essentially say, if it's a 500-meter buffer, it's going to go 500 meters in each direction of that point. They're kind of going to have a radius of 500 meters, or a diameter circle around this point of 1 kilometer. So that really limits the size and scale of what someone can download as well. So stopping them from creating a giant polygon or giant shape, which is actually going to terminate the process or occupy your licenses for a long period of time. Cool. And then set a default. Again, I want this to be not optional as well, because if I feed in that point and say run it through a bufferer, and then in my buffer distance I've put in, I keep leaning on my keyboard, and then I create my buffer distance, but the buffer distance isn't populated, FME doesn't know how to process that, and then that's probably going to cause a rejected feature, and then as a result have no download for the end user as well. So that wraps up our area of interest, and now I'm going to talk about preparing layers for download. This will depend on any of your, I guess, where you're trying to download data from, but in this instance, I just do a bit of attribute management ultimately, using one single user parameter as well. So you might have a number of layers which you want a user to select from. Here I've created a layers parameter, and if I look at that, I've gone with a choice with alias, named it layers, and then prompted the user to say which layers do you want to download. Again, don't make that optional, because if they don't select anything, then it's going to try and download nothing. Say it was a success because they didn't ask to download anything, but obviously the user doesn't get anything. And here I've gone with the choice with alias so that the user sees what a label, what the layer is actually called, or what would make sense to them. But in the background, that's actually pointing at, a layer with a unique ID on the Lynn data service. And that might be, you might think of something like the table name that you have in an SDE database. That might be the value because that's the table it's pointing at. But you want to make it really clean, title case with spaces. It doesn't need to be, the exact table name that wouldn't make sense to an end user. You want to make it as explicit and I guess obvious as possible. So actually passing these in with an alias is a great idea, so that when the user actually interacts with it, this is what they're selecting from, is the actual display names, and they don't actually need to worry at all about what the actual code behind it is. So I'll just say okay. So now when I connect up the buffer to my attribute manager, I just remove everything prior to that because they're all geocode attributes. Those are not essential. All I wanted was the shape. Then I'm going to create an attribute called feature type, and I'm going to fetch the parameter for the layers, which we've just looked at. From the attribute manager, I'm going to send that to an attribute splitter, and I'll just show you why. That when we, sorry, and I didn't show you the buffer either. Zoom selected. So you see, sorry, that was my mistake, is that I created a circle instead of a point. So that's our area of interest. Then when I run it to our attribute manager, this is the only attribute we have. And you'll see there that from the multiple items I selected in that list, that they're all separated with a space. So then I feed it to an attribute splitter, which creates a list, and it separates them based on the space. So you might have a comma separated list sometimes, but this one's just a space one. That writes it to a list. We then feed it to a list exploder. So that's going to take the multiple items which were contained within that single attribute and explode it from a list back into individual features as well. So here, where we had one feature the whole way through, we now have 5 features. And you see in our feature type, these all relate to the individual layer that we actually want to read. Now, one more thing. So the next step is actually requesting the data from the Lynn's data service. So now that we've got, each individual layer that we actually want to retrieve, there is a little bit of a clunky step here I have to do, and that's just around reprojecting the data, because at the moment it's all in, it's an NZTM. But on the Lynn's data service, some services I think are hosted in New Zealand MapGrid, and some are still in NZTM. So what we actually do when we request the features is we give it a bounding box. But if the features bounding box is in the wrong coordinate system, it's obviously not then what the actual data set is. It's not going to return any features. So we actually just need to reproject that so that the extent works. So here, if you've used a tester before, you'll see I've just done a little trick here where I've moved the passport down to the bottom. If you haven't seen this before, you can move these down or move them up, depending. So normally pass is on the top and failed is on the bottom. But you can move them up to save you having these crossover if you're a little bit OCD like I am as well. Then what will happen is this is just passing for the layers that I know are in New Zealand MapGrid, so they need to be run to the reprojector instead. Then I pass everything through to a feature reader, where here I'm reading from a WFS, which we referenced from the Lynn's data service. My data set uses my API key, which is there as a private parameter as well. And then in here under feature types, I'm going to read from my, oops, sorry, not a parameter, because we've actually fetched it from the parameter, and we're gonna read from feature type. Cool, so feature types to read, value feature type. Now, when I run to here, this is a very dangerous game here because last time I ran this, it didn't actually work while Gary was doing his presentation. So tempting fate a little bit anytime you do a live demo. So hopefully, now that I run through to here, and particularly tempting fate reading from a web service as well. That doesn't look promising, which is inevitable. But while that runs, and oh, that looks promising, it's got some movement. We'll wait and see, but while that's running, I'll just talk you through these next components as well. So once we actually pass this out of the feature reader, I'm going to pass this to a reprojector as well. So that gives the user another option as well, which is actually a coordinate system that they may want to reproject their data to before they download it. So here, they can actually input a destination coordinate system. Oops, that's not going to look ahead for me. So I'll use this handy drop down. I'll say use coordinate system, and this coordinate system parameter is actually a type of coordinate system name, which is really great. You used to have to actually have to sort of do a lookup list and import them with the choice with alias, but now coordinate system name is it's just a parameter type. Again, I've used the prompt what output coordinate system would you like, and then set a default, but then the user is just going to get full functionality of what FME has to offer in terms of coordinate system options. Oh, that was promising. We did actually return some data. So I requested the address points and our building footprints as well, which has actually come through and pulled straight from the Lynn's data service, which is awesome. I was getting a bit nervous there, thinking live demo time, of course, nothing will work. So then we have our reprojector, and then the last step is actually to choose our output format. And what's really great about output format and is actually not that well known is that you can actually use a what's called a generic writer. And I'll just show you that by adding a writer. If you just write generic. So generic writer is any format, and then you can actually define the output format. So in this case, I've created a output format user parameter. And if we go to my definition, you'll see this is a choice with alias. And I've written what output format would you like. Now in the configuration, I just come in here and I can actually just import reader formats or writer formats. So what I've done here is chosen a subsection of output formats, which I think would be used to our audience, just some very, very common ones. And then I can import writer format and select from this list. I'll just pick something completely, I'll just pick, I don't know, maybe 12D or something. So here, import 12D model, and then you'll see what's going to be displayed versus what is actually coded in. Maybe I'll choose something a bit more strange as well that looks, something like this. You see there it will come in through with, Amazon Aurora non-spatial MySQL compatible, but that's what's being coded into FME to tell it which one to actually choose. So it really makes it a lot more user-friendly in terms of what they see versus what's actually being told to FME. So I'm just going to leave that there, and then under my format, I can actually, in my output format, now change this to our user parameter of, sorry, the shortcuts aren't working, output format. So whatever is passed into that output format when the workspace runs will be passed in as the value here. So that way it can give you, whatever the user chooses, whether it's GeoJSON or shapefile, and then actually creates the data download based on what's being passed in via that parameter. So that's pretty much it as far as configuration goes to create an entire data download portal. Now, if I was to run that, hopefully we get some result as well. So if I just go, I'm going to run with user parameters prompted. Output format, let's just go to, say, the geodatabase. That's written some features. Now, hopefully, if I jump across to here, is that the one that data download? Is this the one I just created? Sorry. Nope, that was earlier today. Generic. Sorry, I'll see where I've actually written this to. Here we go. Throw it into my working folder. Here we've created a geodatabase, and we're going well. If I open that, I'll do that shortly actually. Now I'll just show you, I would just publish this up to FME server like this now. Connection to my FME server, continue. And then you can see I've created a few. So this is my begin one, but then I just choose the services that I want to register. In this case, obviously, we'd make creating a data download portal. So it's pretty obvious we're going to use the data download service, but you'd just be selecting which services you want to access this workspace to access anyway. Now, I'll just quickly flick across to my FME server and show you actually configuring an FME server app. So here under the side panel, we've got build workspace app. You just create a name. So I'm just going to call it demo download portal, Lynn's data download portal. So the name is what it's actually named inside FME Server. So it's like databases and things, it can't have spaces. But the title is what will be kind of the header at the top of the app. Here's a hopefully working download portal. Then I just choose the repository. So it's much the same as building a schedule. I'm going to look at server apps. I just called this the Lynn's WFS begin. Which service do I want it to utilize? I'm going to choose the data download. And then under parameters, see, this is really important. Here, this is what I actually want to be available to the user. So you don't have to have every parameter that you've got published available, or you can have some of them available, but hard, they're being used, but they're not hard, but they're hard coded in. So that's the only option, because a user wouldn't have the ability to select it if it's not shown in the app. And you can see there, I started doing it really well, and it was very easy for me. I just forgot to untick optional on those user parameters. And so now if someone doesn't select those, or they're backspaced out, I think they might be okay in this instance. I'm not sure if it's possible to. Oh, it might be. It might not be possible to actually take them out. So we might be okay in that sense, but it's very easy, you see, to just forget that things are optional, and if someone doesn't fill it out, your app's going to break as well. But that's as simple as that. I can just go okay. It's going to generate a link, and hopefully we'll see if this works. You see all these things that I parked in there. Here's a hopefully working data download. It's my area, so my address of interest, how large I want that buffer to be, which layers do I actually want to download. So let's just say, let's take addresses and footprints again. See, if I try type in 1,000, it tells me that that's invalid. So value must be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 500. So that limitation really works. And if I backspace it, you'll see it knows it needs a value and turns red as well. So I'll just type that back in. And then 500, let's just go with 100, and my long 84. Let's just output some GeoJSON. Let's keep file.geo database again. And if I say okay, that should hopefully just go ahead and run for me. So you see a lot of those things really just relate to that user interaction by creating a user parameter that actually allows interaction, but still limits the interaction as well. So yeah, it gives them interaction, but with limitations, and that makes sure that the process is robust and bulletproof. So I think a good exercise that you could do as well, if you're creating a server app, is actually try and think of a way that you can create user error, because although I like to laugh at user error as well, if there's the ability to create user error and that could be eliminated, then that's actually something that you should probably work on more from your own end as well. But because that if people can do something wrong, it kind of will do something wrong because you haven't enforced it or restricted it. So do just be very conscious of that as well. Just while that's running, oh, there it goes. I'll just download that. So it's created a little download. If I jump across to my desktop, I should get a file.geo database. Now, if I jump into here, I'm just going to pop that open in Data Inspector. And if I drop that, picks it up, knows it's a file.geo database, go to parameters, select my tables, and there you can see the different layers which are actually selected. You can see that they're called the actual layer name that they are on Lynn's as well. If we jump back to my workspace, you'll see the way that I've configured that was to use the name of the FME feature type. So that's how it's actually created individual tables depending on the layers which were downloaded. So I'm just going to bring in both of those, and hopefully you should see, again, similar picture. Fun fact, I actually created these building footprints as my first job in GIS as well when I was an intern working at New Plymouth District Council. So they didn't have any LiDAR or any good building footprints. So I did a lot of the urban area when we were creating some base maps. It was a background job, but a good one to get hands on GIS tools as well. So if there's any shoddy lines in there, you can blame me. Now, just jumping across to server, I'll just quickly show you. I did configure what we were looking at before with the map picker earlier, and I've just done a little bit around customization a bit more too. So where you see the visual interface, you have the ability to customize some of this with browser icons, a heading image, some more text and things. If you are making this a good customer portal, I haven't spent too much time in this case, but it's a good idea to actually invest a bit of time, because it will make people more comfortable with your services, and it will make them feel like like it is a professional service as well, more so than a process that they're quite uncomfortable with running, which is a big part of the gap that we're trying to bridge here too. So if I just click across, all I've done is made my app fail for starters. It timed out on me before, which is when I thought that this might all blow up in my face. But I've just done a few simple things like creating a little icon there, which you can see on the tab. So you can see Locus's logo next to Lynn's data download portal, as well as putting on a header. It's a good idea to put some documentation in. And if you were going to go down the road of building a lot of apps, I would really, certainly advise creating like a nice header image and a nice footer image or footer text as well, which might drive you to other services that you offer, because it will help stimulate more business too. But yeah, this is the completed one I did, with which we've just seen. But the other alternative that I did was actually just to use the map picker still. I didn't customize it again, but here you could do the same thing where the user could interact and just use a point instead of the line, instead of the polygon or the rectangle. So the user would just have the ability to draw a point of interest. That'd be really helpful if you're not dealing with addresses so much, but you're actually, particularly in rural areas, if you're forestry or something similar. And then using the buffer option as well, but that does give that ability for people to visually pick it rather than have to have an address of interest too, which is another alternative. And what's really cool about that is when you build a workspace app like that, I'll just show you, you could use server apps, if I'm right, called complete. You can create an app off the same, two apps off the same workspace. So this is configured slightly, I put a little bit more enhancements just to deal with this point of interest and setting the coordinate system and testing if one of these was filled out. But ultimately, you just publish and you just create two apps, and you not show the map picker in one and show the area of interest, and then show the map picker in the other one and not show the address point, and you'll get the same result. So it's a low maintenance way of doing it as well. I am wary I'm sort of running a bit over time, as is always the case, but just a little bit on FME Server Gallery apps. They were new in 2020, and really they're a customizable landing page for groupings of workspace apps and other relevant links. Gallery apps are really good because they can give your customer a feeling of professionalism from your work by seeing a whole landing page for your services. Rather than just directed straight to links. I find that doesn't necessarily get such a good reception. And also it's about visibility. So your users or customers can see all of the services that you offer, and that'll help to stimulate additional work or projects when people can see all the capabilities that you have, maybe a reporting system or an app that you've created for another department, which, while it is completely unrelated in terms of actual content, the actual structure and the medium or the way that people access it is often quite similar. So hopefully that can stimulate a fair bit of interest as well. So I'll very quickly show you how to create one of those. So under your server apps on FME Server, you can go build a gallery app. So it's very, very similar to what we've just been looking at in the server app. You name it, create a title, and give a description, and then you just add links. I'll just take you over to one that I've, a very, very basic one that I've created as well. So I've called it Karen Spatial Data Services, given a little description blurb, and then I've just added in links. And what's great about the links is you can add in links directly to Workspace apps. So it's going to pick up all of the apps that you have essentially in your app gallery, is just to be able to choose from them rather than needing the URLs. And then label them, give a tooltip, you know, add an image just to give someone an idea. So I've done that with a few. So one I did at the World Tour here was an address locator app. I've just created a data download portal using the Lynn's data service. And then I've just shown you as well, you can actually refer to an external, you know, thing as well. So you can, instead of just pathing into a Workspace app, you can path into a different URL. So that might be to another related app or map or something, or report generator that you actually have. This is actually just quite funny, this this app as well. But I will, sorry, I'm just getting a bit lost with my panels on my screen. So now I'll just take you to see what that looks like. And you just see it's just created a very basic web page. Obviously, you can spend a lot more time with your, you know, generating really good, like, I guess, visual experience for you as well. But you'll see what's put there is the tooltips that pop up whenever you hover over the icon that you've created. And if I click on any of these, it's just going to link me through to the apps that I've created as well in another tab. So it is, yeah, really easy to create a web page and a good landing page, especially without having to have your own web server or ability to, I guess, write the code and manage it yourself. And just to finish off as well, sharing with FME Server Apps. So I know that one of the first feedbacks with Server Apps was the inability to share. Everything was essentially shared to public, from my understanding anyway. Sorry, public being whoever could access your FME server. So in 2020, they've added the ability to leverage all of FME Server's sharing options within FME Server Apps. So you can share, you know, you have the ability to share apps with individual users, groups, or roles. And that's great, so that you can open up your apps to many different users, but still have that option to restrict apps with sensitive information. And also, I think just around a maturity side of things as well, when people understand that running, you know, sending 100 requests to the server to generate a report, which might take half an hour, is going to create 50 hours worth of processing time for the server. And if you're on a really low, I guess, number of engines, that's going to create a bit of an issue for all of your other users who might want a really snappy response from your server as well. So to do that, when you create an app, you just go into your app, and you see here you can go require authentication. You can do that on your gallery apps as well as Workspace apps, but here you can see under allowed users the ability to modify that as well. I've just got a little locally installed server, so I don't have a huge amount of users, as you can see, just the built-in roles. But that's, yeah, a really great tool as well. So just to sum up, Workspace server apps are a great way to provide an interactive experience to your customers, where FME workspaces can be run on demand. User parameters are really the key to this, and they allow that interaction, but can ensure appropriate restriction in order for all of your apps to work well. So I do really highly recommend investing a lot of time into designing those well. And then gallery apps are effective in managing the presentation of your apps to customers, and really generating that sense of professionalism with your work as well. I'll just take a moment to see if there's any questions which have popped up into my feed. Just one moment.
I had a couple of questions, Kieran, if you want me to
awesome.
ask those.
Yeah, that would be great. Cheers.
While you catch up on your ones. The first
Cheers.
question I had was, what happens if the device doesn't have network connectivity? Basically, everything you've seen today does require internet connections to be able to talk to FME Server. So if you are going into areas you know don't have networks, then you're really going to have to find some other alternative. Maybe you can develop a application that uses FME Server API in the back end, but stores data until you come into connectivity. So for the Oxford Trailwalker, for example, if I went down there and knew a checkpoint didn't have good connectivity, I just wouldn't use this. I'd revert back to having a laptop, which would store the data. The other question I had was, do uploaded images get saved somewhere on the server? So that demo I showed where I took a photo and submitted that through the server app. It does get saved on the server somewhere for the Workspace to process it. I think by default it gets deleted after 24 hours. So you really wouldn't want to rely on that copy of it. Most basic Workspace would be a JPEG reader and then straight out to a JPEG writer where you can control where it gets saved. Other two questions I had, Kieran.
Cool, awesome, cheers Gary. And just a couple of questions I had come through. Once published, what's an easy way to maintain or update the key? So you can actually update the key from, I think it's the admin console is up the top right hand corner of FME Server. There you have the ability to, I guess, manage tokens and access to different apps and things that you've published. I think new in 2020 is all of those are sort of revoked and disabled when you do a config update. And that's purely, I think, just to not inadvertently give access to things that people shouldn't have access to. I've had a question around the schemas for individual layers coming out of the generic port. Good spotting that I did gloss over that. We don't really have time to go into that because that is quite an in-depth topic. But ultimately, yeah, just it needs quite a bit of work. So you want to see what you actually want to expose. When you're creating a data download portal permanently, though, you would actually, I guess, just take the time to actually expose it and make sure all of your attributes pull through correctly. In this instance, I guess that wasn't the intention, it's more just to show what's possible. But yeah, good question, just not today. And there's a question around being able to take the application code as it is and integrate it with other JavaScript libraries. From my understanding, I don't know if you know anything more, Gary, but I don't believe it is possible to take it, customize it, and redeploy it. It really is a configuration only thing. In that instance, I would say it's more likely that you would want to, I guess you could observe a lot of the sort of the REST calls that are being made in the background with the parameters that are being passed in and how that actually interacts with your FME server via the web page. So you could use your developer tools to see that. But in that instance, it kind of lends itself more towards custom development and using the REST API. There's a lot of good examples on that, in particular on the FME server playground as well. Cool. That wraps it up for me for questions. Hopefully, yeah, you've all enjoyed this webinar and taken something away from it. Again, apologies to anyone who's had any sort of technical difficulties actually accessing this. I've had a few messages come through around a black screen, but from what I could see, it was all working. So hopefully everything just comes through and you can access the slides if not. But otherwise, that wraps it up for me. And thanks all for joining.